I remember the exact moment my world shattered into 1,000 pieces. It was a Tuesday afternoon in September 1944, and I was hanging laundry in our backyard in Springfield, Illinois. The sun was warm on my shoulders, and the smell of fresh soap mixed with the scent of Mrs. Henderson's roses from next door. I was humming along to a Glenn Miller tune that had been stuck in my head all morning when I heard the front gate creak open. My hands froze on the wet sheet I was pinning to the line. Everyone in our neighborhood knew that sound, the deliberate, measured footsteps of the Western Union messenger. My heart started racing before I even turned around. I dropped the clothespin and walked slowly toward the front of the house, my legs feeling like they were moving through water. The young messenger, barely 16 years old, stood at our front porch. His face was pale and he wouldn't meet my eyes. He held out the yellow envelope with a trembling hand. "Mrs. Catherine Morrison?" he asked, though he already knew who I was. Everyone in Springfield knew the families waiting for news from overseas. "Yes," I whispered, staring at that envelope like it was a snake about to strike. I'm so sorry, ma'am." He pressed it into my hand and hurried away before I could even open it. My fingers shook as I tore open the envelope. The words blurred together at first, but then they came into sharp, cruel focus. "The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your husband, Captain James Morrison, was killed in action in France on September 12, 1944. I don't remember falling, but suddenly I was on my knees on the front porch, that telegram clutched in my hands. The neighbor's dog was barking somewhere far away. A car drove past. Life continued around me while mine had just ended. James and I had been married for 6 years. We'd grown up together in Springfield, had been sweethearts since high school. He'd enlisted right after Pearl Harbor, determined to do his part. "I'll come back to you, Katie," he'd promised the day he left, holding my face in his hands at the train station. I swear I'll come back, but he hadn't. He was gone, 28 years old, and gone forever. The funeral was held 2 weeks later, though there was no body to bury. We had a ceremony at the First Presbyterian Church where we'd been married. The entire town seemed to turn out. James had been popular, the kind of guy who knew everyone's name, who'd help you fix your car or move furniture without being asked. The church was packed with people whose lives he'd touched. I sat in the front pew in my black dress, holding James's mother's hand, while his father stood rigid and silent beside us. The chaplain spoke about sacrifice and honor and duty. He said James had died a hero, leading his men through enemy territory in France. He said we should be proud. I tried to feel proud. I really did. But all I felt was hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and left nothing but an empty shell. After the service, people came to our house. They brought casseroles and pies and kind words that meant nothing. "He died for his country," they said. "He's in a better place now. Time heals all wounds." I smiled and thanked them and pretended their words helped. But that night, after everyone left, I sat alone in our bedroom, holding James's shirts from the closet, trying to smell him in the fabric. The scent was already fading. 6 months passed in a grey blur. I went through the motions of living, working at the munitions factory, helping with the war bond drives, writing letters to other soldiers to keep morale up. Everyone said I was so brave, so strong. They didn't see me crying into my pillow every night or talking to James's photograph like he could hear me. It was a cold March morning in 1945 when everything changed. I was getting ready for my shift at the factory, making coffee in the kitchen while the radio played the morning news. The war in Europe was winding down. Everyone said it would be over soon. Germany was collapsing. The Allies were closing in. I heard the mail slot clatter and went to collect the letters. Bills, mostly. A letter from my sister in Ohio. And then, a postcard. My hands went numb as I stared at it. The postcard showed a street scene in Berlin, already outdated because half the city was rubble now. But that wasn't what made my heart stop. The handwriting on the back was James's. I would have recognized it anywhere. Those distinctive loops on the letters, the way he crossed his T's. I'd received dozens of letters from him during the war, had memorized every quirk of his penmanship. But James was dead. The army had told me so. We'd had a funeral. I'd been wearing black for 6 months. My hands shaking so badly I could barely read, I brought the postcard into the light of the kitchen window. "Katie," it said, "I'm alive. I'm in Berlin. They're holding us in a camp. Don't know when I'll get home. Don't give up hope. I love you. And Jay." The postcard slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. I gripped the edge of the kitchen table, my mind racing. This had to be some kind of cruel joke. Some sick person's idea of entertainment. But who would do such a thing? And how would they know James's handwriting so perfectly? I picked up the postcard again, studying every word, every letter. The postmark was smudged, but I could make out Berlin and a date from 2 weeks ago. "This isn't possible," I said aloud to the empty kitchen. "He's dead. They told me he's dead. But what if he wasn't?" I ran to the telephone and called the War Department office in Chicago. It took 45 minutes to get through to someone who could help me, and another hour of being transferred from one official to another. Each person I spoke to sounded more confused than the last. Finally, I got a Major Richardson on the line. "Mrs. Morrison," he said carefully, "I understand this must be very distressing, but I'm looking at your husband's file right now. Captain James Morrison was killed in action on September 12, 1944, near the French-German border. His entire unit was ambushed. There were no survivors." "Then how do you explain this postcard?" I demanded, my voice rising. "I have it right here in my hand. It's his handwriting. It's postmarked from Berlin 2 weeks ago." There was a long pause. "Ma'am, it's not uncommon for families to receive false hope. Sometimes people play cruel pranks. Sometimes—" "This is not a prank," I shouted into the phone. "I know my husband's handwriting. Mrs. Morrison, please calm down. I know this is difficult, but—" "I want someone to investigate this," I interrupted. "I want someone to check the POW camps in Berlin. If there's even a chance he's alive." "The camps are being liberated as we speak," Major Richardson said. "The Russians are moving through Berlin now. It's chaos over there, but I promise you, if your husband were alive and in a POW camp, his name would be on our lists. We account for every prisoner." "Then why isn't his name there?" I asked desperately. "If he's dead, where's his body? Why was there no body?" Another pause. "The ambush was extensive. There was an explosion. Not all remains could be recovered or identified." I felt sick, but I also felt something I hadn't felt in 6 months. A tiny spark of hope, burning in my chest like a stubborn flame refusing to die. "I'm keeping this postcard," I said, "and I'm going to find out the truth." I hung up before he could respond. I became obsessed. Everyone thought I was losing my mind. My mother-in-law, my friends, even my own sister told me I needed to accept reality and move on. But I couldn't. That postcard had reignited something in me, and I refused to let it go. I wrote letters to every military office I could find addresses for. I contacted the Red Cross. I even wrote to General Eisenhower's headquarters, though I never expected a response. Most of my letters went unanswered. The ones that did reply all said the same thing. James was dead. I needed to accept it, and the postcard was either a forgery or a case of mistaken identity. But I kept digging. I found other wives and mothers whose loved ones had been declared dead with no bodies recovered. We formed a sort of informal network, sharing information and supporting each other. Most of their cases led nowhere. Their men really were gone, lost in the chaos of war. But a few, just a few, discovered that mistakes had been made, men misidentified, paperwork mixed up. In the fog of war, errors happened. 3 months after receiving the postcard, I got a letter from a Lieutenant Harris who'd served with James. He'd just been discharged and heard I'd been asking questions. He came to visit me in Springfield on a warm June afternoon. The war in Europe was over by then. Hitler was dead. Germany had surrendered. But there were still so many questions, so many loose ends. Lieutenant Harris sat in my living room, holding his army cap in his hands. He was young, maybe 25, with kind eyes and a nervous manner. "Mrs. Morrison," he began slowly, "I don't want to give you false hope, but there's something you should know about that day, the day Captain Morrison supposedly died." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "Tell me everything." "We were on a reconnaissance mission near the German border," he explained. "Captain Morrison was leading a small unit, just 12 men. We got ambushed by a German patrol. It was chaos, explosions, gunfire, smoke everywhere. When it was over, we counted our dead. We found 10 bodies. Captain Morrison and another private were missing." "Missing?" I whispered. "Not dead?" "The official report said they must have been killed in the explosion. Their bodies too damaged to recover, but—" He paused, looking uncomfortable. "I was there, Mrs. Morrison. I saw what happened. Right before the biggest explosion, I saw Captain Morrison go down behind an embankment. The Germans were closing in. It's possible. I'm saying it's possible. They captured him instead of killing him." "Why didn't you report this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I did," he said miserably. "I told my commanding officer exactly what I saw, but with the chaos of the retreat, the paperwork got messed up. And then the official report came down saying both men were KIA. I tried to correct it, but he shrugged helplessly. Nobody wanted to listen to a junior lieutenant contradicting official reports. I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison. I should have fought harder. After he left, I sat alone with this new information. James might have been captured. He might have survived. The postcard might really be from him. I contacted Major Richardson again, armed with Lieutenant Harris's testimony. This time, he listened more carefully. I'll make some inquiries, he promised. But Mrs. Morrison, you need to understand, even if your husband was captured and held in a POW camp, the camps were hellish places. Many prisoners didn't survive, and with Berlin falling to the Russians, the chaos, records are incomplete at best. Just please check, I begged. Please, he promised he would. 2 more months passed. July turned to August. The war with Japan ended. The entire country celebrated, but I felt disconnected from the joy around me. I was stuck in limbo, caught between grief and hope, unable to move forward in either direction. Then, on a humid Tuesday afternoon in late August, there was a knock at my door. I'd been baking bread and I wiped flour from my hands as I went to answer it. Through the screen door, I saw a man in a military uniform standing on my porch. My first thought was that he was there to deliver bad news, final confirmation that James was really dead, that the postcard had been a cruel hoax. But then the man removed his cap and I saw his face. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could only stare. "Katie," James said, and his voice broke. "Katie, I'm home." He was so thin, painfully thin. His cheeks were hollow. His uniform hung loose on his frame, and there were new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But it was him. It was really him. I don't remember opening the door or running to him, but suddenly I was in his arms and he was real and solid and alive. I was crying and laughing at the same time, touching his face, his shoulders, his hands, making sure he was real and not some dream I'd conjured out of desperate hope. "I thought you were dead," I sobbed into his chest. "They told me you were dead." "I almost was," he said softly, holding me so tight I could barely breathe. "So many times, Katie. So many times." We stood there on the porch, holding each other for what felt like hours. Neighbors started coming out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. Word spread fast in our small town. Soon there was a crowd gathering, people crying and cheering, wanting to hear the story, wanting to celebrate this miracle. But James was exhausted, and I could see the trauma lurking behind his eyes. I ushered him inside, closing the door on the well-meaning crowd. That night, after he'd bathed and eaten, though he could only manage small amounts of food, his stomach still adjusting, we sat together in our bedroom, and he told me everything. He had been captured that day in September. The German patrol had taken him and Private Chen, the other missing soldier. They'd been moved from camp to camp as the Germans retreated, always one step ahead of the Allied advance. The conditions had been brutal. Many men hadn't survived. "I kept your picture with me," he said, pulling a tattered photograph from his pocket. It was the one I'd given him before he deployed, me in my Sunday dress, smiling at the camera. Every night I'd look at it and promise myself I'd get home to you. That's what kept me going, Katie. You kept me alive. "How did you send the postcard?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "There was a guard at the Berlin camp, an older German soldier who was sick of the war. He had a wife and daughter back home. I think he saw himself in me, saw his family in my photograph. He smuggled out the postcard for me. I don't know if he survived the fall of Berlin. I hope he did. The Russians had liberated the camp in April, but the chaos of the Russian advance, combined with the Allied confusion about which prisoners belonged to which armies, had meant weeks more of confusion. James had been moved to a displaced persons camp, then slowly processed through the military bureaucracy. He'd sent telegrams as soon as he could, but the system was overwhelmed with millions of refugees and returning soldiers. "I tried to let you know I was alive," he said. "I tried so hard. I was terrified you'd think I was dead." "I did think you were dead," I admitted, "for 6 months. But then the postcard came and I knew. Somehow I knew you were out there." Major Richardson called the next day to apologize. The army had made a mistake, several mistakes actually. The misidentification, the lost paperwork, the failure to check James's name against the POW lists. They were very sorry for our suffering, but we'd already forgiven them. We'd already moved past it, because James was home, and that was all that mattered. Recovery was slow. James had nightmares most nights, waking up shouting in German, his body rigid with remembered fear. He'd lost 40 pounds in captivity and struggled to gain it back. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when I'd find him staring at nothing, lost in memories he couldn't share with me, but we worked through it together. We talked with other veterans and their families. We found a counselor who specialized in helping returning POWs. Slowly, gradually, James began to heal. The postcard that had brought me hope stayed on our mantle, a reminder of the power of faith and persistence. People in town called it the miracle postcard, and our story was even written up in the local newspaper. But to me, it wasn't a miracle. It was James, his stubbornness, his determination, his refusal to give up. He'd survived the impossible because he'd promised to come home, and James Morrison always kept his promises. On our 7th wedding anniversary, we renewed our vows at the same church where we'd held his funeral. This time, everyone was crying with joy instead of grief. James looked handsome in his dress uniform, still too thin, but getting stronger every day. And when he promised to love me until death do us part, we both knew how precious and fragile that promise was, and how lucky we were to have another chance. That night, lying in bed with my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, that beautiful, steady heartbeat I thought I'd never hear again, I finally let go of the grief I'd carried for so long. "I love you," I whispered into the darkness. "I love you too, Katie," he replied. "I came back to you just like I promised, and this time we both knew no force on earth could take that promise away from us again."